Seems like one is believes that they're dirty and need to get clean, and the other is clean saying I ain't getting dirty.
That's right. That's very,
Kind of weird.
that's very
Put it that way.
that's a very clear way to put it. Yeah. They knew they had the ability to do right, and the response to that made them a responsibility to do right. On page 111, after talking about some of the various dynasties, John Jackson says this: "For there was a young Egyptian priest named Moshe, M-O-S-H-E, Moses, who had received his theological education at Heliopolis, who became a disciple of Akhenaten." Now, I'm going now to a book by Sigmund Freud, Moses Monotheism, on page 5. On the other hand, he's discussing different theories about Moses. On the other hand, the suggestion has long been made by many different people that the name Moses derives from the Egyptian vocabulary. Instead of citing all the authors who have voiced this opinion, I shall quote a passage from a recent work by Breasted, an author whose history of Egypt is regarded as authoritative. Now, that alone I find interesting because I didn't know that a lot of authorities said that Moses was an Egyptian, that the word Moses was an Egyptian name. I thought it was a Hebrew name. But apparently Sigmund Freud, who was Hebrew, or Jewish, he says that he knows many authorities who said that Moses was an Egyptian name. It is important to notice that his name, Moses, was Egyptian. It is simply the Egyptian word Moshe, M-O-S-E, meaning child, and is an abridgment of the fuller form of such names such as, and this rang home, Amenamos, meaning Ammon the child, or Patamos, meaning Ptah, child. These forms themselves being likewise abbreviation of the complete form. Ammon has given a child, or Ptah has given a child. The abbreviation child early became a convenient rapid form for the compass full name, and the name Moshe, M-O-S-E, child, is not uncommon on the Egyptian monuments. The father of Moses, without doubt, prefixed to his son's name that of an Egyptian god like Ammon or Ptah, and this divine name was gradually lost in current usage, till the boy was called Mos, the final S an addition drawn from the Greek translation of the Old Testament. It is not in the Hebrew, which is Moshe. I've given this passage literally, and am by no means prepared to share the responsibility for details. I'm a little surprised, however, that Breasted, in citing related names, should have passed over the analogous Theophilus names in the list of Egyptian kings, such as Ahmose, Tutmos, and Ramos. Now, we have the English form, Ramesses, but the Egyptian form is Ramos. So now, again, if you have the context for language, then things fall into place. Once I understand that the name has been anglicized to Moses, and it's Mos, then I can see the connection with Tutmos, Ramos, all the other names that I knew but did not know had a connection to the name Moses. This book, by Sigmund Freud, one of the few books by Sigmund Freud that they don't talk about. He then talks about Akhenaten, in fact, that Akhenaten had gotten rid of all the other god names except Aton. And he says, for this reason, that rejecting every species of image or idols, Moses wished the deity to be worshipped without emblems and according to his proper nature. And he accordingly ordered a temple worthy to him be erected. This is from Strabo's Geography Book 16, cited by C.F. Volding in The Ruins of Empires, page 150, 151. As we know, Moses was not entirely successful, since many of his followers still worship the old gods. There are a number of passages here that he does a lot of work on sun worship, and indicating that the the background to what became what we would call their religion. Egyptian sun worship was a very complex affair, since the sun was known by several names and its various attributes were differentiated and made the objects of divine worship. The Egyptians, in the deification of the sun, observed Mr. Alcott, he referred to Alcott earlier in this passage, considered the luminary in its different aspects, separating the light from the heat of the sun and the orb from the rays. Egyptian sun worship was therefore polytheistic, and several distinct deities were worshipped as sun gods. Thus, there were sun gods representing the physical orb, the intellectual sun, the sun considered as the source of heat and the source of light, the source of power, the sun is firmament, and the sun is resting place. They also seemed, they were very comfortable with letting each group of people give whatever names they wanted to particular deities. And that gets a little confusing sometimes because very often we'll be talking about the same deity, but maybe 4 or 5 different names. Because Ptah may be the name in one place, Amun might be the name someplace else, Aton someplace else. So that it takes a little bit of study sometimes to know exactly what you're talking about. You may get the idea that there are many different gods being talked about, when in fact they were the same entity under different names, depending upon the locality that was giving worship or veneration to that particular god. The greatest of the sun gods of ancient Egypt, it seems, was Ra or Re. Again, we don't have vowels in Egyptian, who's the personification of the physical sun. Indeed, Ra was just the ordinary everyday name for the sun. Ra was a member of the solar trinity, the other partners of the trio being Osiris and Horus. The sun god Ra was usually represented as a man with the head of a hawk, holding in one hand the regal scepter and the other the crux ansana, that's the cross with the handle. On his head was a globe or disc, around which a uraeus or asp snake was coiled, the serpent being symbolic of the power over life and death. The figure of Ra and the disc on his head were generally painted red, since the god was particularly associated with the heat of the noonday sun. Osiris, on the other hand, was emblematic of the setting sun. As a dweller among men, his form was that of the Apis bull. As judge of the dead, he was pictured as a mummy, of sacred blue color, armed with the rod of authority and the crux asana, and wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. His eldest son, Horus, was the rising sun, who slew the dragon of darkness with a spear. Now, the Osiris figure has now come to us as Amen, the god of the dead, the god of night, the god you cannot see. So in church, when we say Amen, we're really naming the God, the aspect of God that you cannot see. The orb on the head of the sun god has become what in the modern church theology? The halo. The halo is actually the sun crowning their head.
So all the 3 great religions of today are just basically sun religion.
Yes.
Sun worship.
Yeah.
Christianity,
Yeah.
Judaism, and
Yeah. I've been pulling together a workshop. It probably will be to the summer now, and this book has been going back into the book has been very helpful because what he does in this book, he goes to the story of Hercules, and shows the story of Hercules is nothing again but the sun passing through various houses of the zodiac, and I'm almost certain when I go back and look at the life of Jesus, it'll be the same thing. And once again, people are much more happy to believe the story than the story behind the story. Most religion on this planet is the worship of the sun being the primary life giver on the planet. Without the sun, we wouldn't be here.
Do you think people are more comfortable believing the story as opposed to the story behind the story because they don't want to be accountable for what their lives, so they can always say, put your faith in Jesus or God will save the day, as opposed to, you basically have to get up and do it yourself.
I think that what happens, I tell a story very often about the homeless man who was taken before the judge accused of being drunk in the shelter, having set his bed on fire. And he told the judge, he said, "Judge, I admit I was drunk because I drink." He said, "But I swear to God, that bed was burning when I laid down in it." That's our situation. We come into the world's already doing something. Imagine, who am I to look at the massive Christian church and tell all them learned people that they're all wrong? That what they really are worshiping, they don't understand.
Well, you could start with, with something simple, like if people just ask questions, like last time we met, when you said, if you look at the center of St. Peter's Square, and Catholic Church is the original Christian church,
yes,
the spinoff, why would they have, of all things in the center, an ancient African monument, a tekken or an obelisk, as the Greeks call it? Why would it not have a cross or something represent their religion?
The diehard Christians will say that's why the Catholic Church is wrong. They are the devil, and they got all that pagan stuff in there. And that's why they needed. That's why we need to break away and get away from all of that. You're right, but people find all kind of excuses.
Most of our lives of quiet desperation. We are taught to believe things, and most of the things we're taught to believe are not true. We live in a democracy. We don't have freedom and equality in this country.
Certainly not for us.
But we accept a lie, and we act as though it's true. And we spend our whole lives working, for things that many of us could do without. And we miss out on the richer parts of life. I know myself over the last 20 years that I have cousins who I've not had much contact with at all in the last 20 years. I was busy working. I was always doing something. I've gotten to the point in my life now where I have more time. I look back, I don't have the relationship that I could have had if I hadn't been quite so busy. One of the saddest moments of my life was when my oldest son went off to Prairie View as the plane pulled out of backed out of the gate. I realized for the 8 years prior to that time, I'd been the national executive director of Phi Beta Sigma, flying around the country. And for a moment, I wondered, have I really spent enough time with my son? Now, in hindsight, I did. I've come to find out I did. But, I give that as an example that so much of our lives are spent in desperation, things that don't mean anything. There's a poem called Patterns, by an English poet, I believe. It's about this English countrywoman. And she talks about how she gets up in the morning and the maid helps her bathe and she puts on her morning dress. And she's at the table to have breakfast with her husband. And when he goes off to work, she takes a nap and then she bathes again and puts on her noonday dress. He comes home and they have lunch and he goes back to work and she rests some more and tends the flowers and whatnot and bathes again and puts on her evening dress, and long poem. At the end of the poem, she says, "My God, what are patterns for?" In other words, her whole life is being wasted in things that look very important, look like luxury, but her life is empty. She's not doing anything. She's not fulfilling herself in any way. She's just an appendage to be at the table when he comes to eat, And many of us live those kind of lives, Baba.
What in effect we are saying is that knowledge, education, enlightenment is essentially a lie. When we begin looking at the truth of these things, as somebody said, truth crushed to the earth shall rise. And here is one of the places where it rises.
There's another section here I want to read. He goes. This chapter 3 is a very important chapter. He gives the entire story of Osiris. I'm not going to read that today, but one of the most complete descriptions I've seen written. On page 141, he says this: about 6,000 years ago, the spring sun would be entering Taurus, and the 4 quarter signs would be the bull, the lion, the scorpion, and the waterman, although some of these signs might be otherwise named. In memory of that early arrangement, which in many ways left its mark, devices on rings were, for example, a scorpion, a lion, a hawk, and a cynocephalus ape. From the 4 quarters we passed to the 12 signs. Between each of the 2 quarter signs, 2 other signs were inserted. He's explaining now that originally in the zodiac there were 4 signs, and then they inserted others in between to get 12. The planisphere of the Temple of Dendera shows 4 gods supporting the heavens at 4 quarter points, corresponding to the bull, the lion, the scorpion, and the waterman, and shows 8 other divinities in pairs, one on either side of each pillar, making up 12. That's from a book called Creation Records Discovered in Egypt, page 136-37 by George St. Clair. I read that because these same figures appear in Christian theology also, and these 4 aspects in different permutations appear, for instance, in Revelation of the 4 horsemen. So the point I'm trying to make is that the ancient symbols that they established have come down to us, sometimes in different form, but they still represent the same things. Here he talks about that. These same sky gods are referred to in the Bible more than once, although the symbols are different, where they're called cherubim. These celestial creatures are seen by Ezekiel in a vision which he had while in Babylon. As for the likeness of their faces, the 4 had the face of a man, the face of a lion on the right side, and the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. That's Ezekiel 1:10. In the Apocalypse, we read about the 4 beasts. In the book of Revelation, chapter 4, verse 7, we are told that the first beast was like a lion, the second beast like a calf, the third beast had the face of a man, and the 4th beast was like a flying eagle. These beasts were the constellations situated at the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac 5,000 years ago. They were Taurus, the bull, at the vernal equinox, Leo, the lion, the summer solstice, Scorpio, the scorpion, autumnal equinox, and Aquarius, the waterman, the winter solstice. In the Bible, the eagle has been substituted for the scorpion. We learn from the erudite Godfrey Higgins that the signs of the zodiac, with the exception of the scorpion, which was exchanged by Dan for the eagle, were carried by the different tribes of Israelites on their standards. And Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio, or the eagle, the 4 signs of Reuben, Judah, Ephraim, and Dan, were placed at the 4 corners at the cardinal points of their encampment, apparently an allusion to the cardinal points of the sphere, the equinoxes, the solstice, and the equinox when it was in Taurus. Here again, when the sun rises on Christmas morning, it rises into a part of the sky which has been called the stable. So that's where the illusion comes from of Jesus being born in the stable. You know, as I said last week, the sun rises in the period of Capricorn. December 25th is Capricorn. Capricorn symbol is the goat. Goat has cloven heels. The sun rises out of total darkness, out of the darkest point of the year, or of the greatest opposition, or the devil. So the cloven hoofs represent the same feet we see on the character of Satan, you know, and Satan is nothing but Set on, the second manifestation of the character of Set that was battling with Horus. So again, it's the same theology repackaged over and over again that's come down through all the various cultures, but we have not been told that. And the average person believes the particular brand of theology they got is the only one and the true one, when in fact they're all true in a sense, but they're all mythological in a sense. And all of them stand for more than we have been told on the surface. And he goes in there quite extensively here. He also talks about the fact that about the worship of Isis, and he gives information here about Paris being the Cathedral of Our Lady in Paris being dedicated first to Isis before it was dedicated to Mary. He talks about the Phoenicians. Again, I didn't realize the Phoenicians were black. You know, everybody who did anything of any value has been lightened up and divorced from us. And you know, it's miraculous how they give you stuff and you don't put two and two together. Now, I was told the Egyptians were white, but in Cecil B. DeMille's picture, he made the Egyptians black because it interposed them against the Hebrews who were white. Now, one thing had to be certain. It's a story about Moses' mama putting him in a basket of reeds and floating him down to Pharaoh's daughter. If that was true, then for sure, Pharaoh's daughter and Moses had to be the same color. Because I couldn't see, you know, I couldn't see Laura Bush, you know, taking Whoopi Goldberg's daughter as her own daughter. You know, people ask questions, you know. So we're given things. At one time, they'll make the Egyptians white if they're trying to say that the Egyptians are great people. At another time, to make them black, they're trying to raise the Hebrews as being great people. So then the Egyptians got to be black in opposition to them, you know. And we watch these two things together, and nothing ever clicks. Because we have.
Didn't they hide Jesus in Egypt or something at one point?
Well, that's something else, you know. If I got in trouble, I wouldn't run to Potomac, Maryland. I head up the southeast. You know, the clues are all there. You know, if you even with the stories being mythologies, if you read the stories and think about what you're reading, you know, they tell you a different story than the interpretation the preacher gave you. You know, who was it? Put his hand inside his bosom. No, not Napoleon. I'm just talking about much earlier than that. In the Bible, put his hand inside. God was showing him a sign. Pull his hand out. His hand was white. Well, if his hand went in white and came out white, that wouldn't be much of a sign. Okay, had to be colored going in. Come out white to be a sign. You know, maybe Aaron. Okay. You the Bible scholar, I'll go with you. You know, we don't. We're not given things in context, and we have not been trained to think. Yes.
And the other thing is, they always say how bad the Egyptians were, but every time you turn around, the so-called Hebrews are going into Egypt.
Yeah.
I mean, they constantly go in there for food and for shelter and for, you know, riches and for information. And then even later on in their history, the Egyptians helped them fight off the Assyrians under Taharqa, who they called Pharaoh's son. And I mean, a Jewish guy just wrote a book on that a couple years ago, saying that the Africans helped the so-called Hebrews beat off the Assyrians. So I mean, we've helped them, we've not hindered them, but like Doc says here, you know, it gets all twisted up, and Egyptians are always shown as bad people. People are always running in there whenever they're in trouble. The Hebrews always, if you know this, you read the Bible, first place they had to is Egypt. And you got to say, well, why would they keep going there if they have all these issues there?
That's the same with the book that they're talking about now, the book of Judah.
They found that?
They found that on the Nile.
That's right.
On the Nile. Always point to the Nile.
Barbara?
You just said we have not been trained to think.
Yeah.
But we have been trained to not think.
Yes. And that happens, very early in school. It's assumed that you don't know